I'm Scott Al Miller, and this is my everyday life living in Leon, Nicaragua. Today, I had my video go live about tipping here in Nicaragua, and I got some feedback from someone who berated me for recommending giving proper tips and using Nicaraguan culture and respecting how people work here and doing things in the appropriate Nicaraguan way and just fitting into society. He felt that Americans needed to stand out and really show off and demonstrate to Nicaraguans that they had more money than them and that it was a bad person for not doing so. This may sound, when I describe it, as something really terrible, but he tried to frame it in a way that made it kind of not sound like he was trying to. No, it didn't sound that way at all. But there's some really important reasons why you should not be over tipping. And I want to talk about why these are, because if you haven't worked in hospitality, you may not have a good understanding of why these things are so important, both culturally and economically. And if you feel like you should be tipping very heavily, there's probably a good reason for that, but there's probably a better way that you could manifest the desires that are probably coming from a good place. So we're going to talk about over tipping and why it's bad, especially when you're outside the United States, right after the bump. I'm going to post this video sometime in the future, so I'm not sure how long it is going to have been since the tipping video came out, but you can easily search for tipping, and I will do my best to link it in here, but I get really bad about that, so we'll see if I ever get around to actually linking it in the video, but it's easy to find. But basically, if you're here in Nicaragua, tipping is 10%. You should always do it as long as you're in a regular sit-down restaurant or whatever. Tips are expected to go into the kitchen and be distributed amongst all the staff. People are paid a full wage. People who work as waiters or whatever are not reduced wages compared to other jobs. In fact, they're slightly higher than the average, only the tiniest bit, but they are a premium job, and they do receive free training for them, university-style training, like vocational training, post-high school for these fields is completely free, and they'll have placement programs. There's a lot that goes into it. These are considered pretty decent jobs. They're not awesome jobs, but they are considered decent, solid, professional jobs here in Nicaragua, and people are compensated in a meaningful way. That does not mean that they make great money, but this is Nicaragua. Everyone is at a relatively low pay scale, so you have to adjust your thinking, and it is super dangerous to bring in an American mindset into Nicaragua. We warn about this all the time, and it has nothing about America particularly. It's that there's so many people who are coming from America, and the United States is such a large country that there has a tendency towards isolation just from the nature of the country being so big, and not always having a good comprehension of how tipping may interact with other cultures and economic systems. So I want to dig into this a little bit because I think it's useful information just in general. If you're traveling anywhere in the world, it's worth learning from. It's also worth noting in the United States, it is generally considered a compliment to tip someone. This comes from a place that most people who work in service industries are legally not required to be fully paid by their employer unless they're not receiving tips. If they're not receiving tips, in theory, the employer is supposed to make up for that, but realistically, they generally do. So the tips are actually the pay for those workers. And so those people are very desperate to get that money, and they expect that you know that and that you will give them a tip that is larger than is socially acceptable or required, so that it's like how they get a raise. Without that, they have no way to get a raise or to move up or to do anything. So they're very dependent on it. And because of that system, it makes people just constantly give more and more and more. So you have tip sprawl, this really toxic tipping culture that has erupted in the United States. Now, there is some backlash against it. I realize that it is coming back, and that is good in some ways. And they are talking about eliminating those laws so that when you go to a restaurant, for example, you know that those people are being fairly compensated and have negotiated for their salary, and that a tip truly is a tip rather than representing their pay, because that's what it's meant to be. That's the idea. So if you are in the United States and you tip very heavily, generally that is considered to be a compliment and is taken as a positive. If you work in the kitchen of a restaurant and are not paid by tips, you are guaranteed a negotiated rate, and you negotiate that knowing you're not going to get tips. If you work in the front of the house and are in the tip system, then you depend on those tips and you do not have those rates. So people are paid differently because of that system. It's weird, and it is really problematic, and it defines or is the underpinning of much of American cultural artifacts around restaurants. So it's things you need to know. If you're traveling to the United States, you really have to understand this, because it's a weird situation that nowhere else in the world has. When you go other places in the world, including like Europe and Latin America, giving out huge tips is generally considered an insult, not a compliment. Most people are aware that Americans are not aware of this, and they generally are like, okay, Americans are weird, and they do this thing, and they don't understand that this would be seen as insulting, and so they don't necessarily take it in a really negative way. But it is important to understand that, especially in Europe, where they have a reasonable reason to believe that Americans should be aware that over-tipping is not complimentary, but is taken as showing off that you have so much money that you can just throw money at people, and randomly treating people who are well-paid hard workers as charity cases is not viewed as very complimentary. Now, if it was a ton of people doing it all the time and it represented a large change in their actual ongoing income, it would probably be different, much like it is in the United States. But when it's just a random person once in a while throwing several extra dollars at them, it doesn't really change their lifestyle or change their life in any meaningful way. It just feels like a person who is showing off that they're richer than them and look down on them for being a service worker. In the United States, we often do look down on service workers. That's a reality of that job, and it's very negative. But in Europe and in Latin America, those are not jobs that are seen as lower than others. They're seen as solid, respectable work, just like anything else. Those people put their shoes on and go to work and work hard just like everyone else, and they're treated just like everyone else. So getting past that American, we need to support them, or that all gifts are a compliment mindset is important. That is actually pretty unique, but it's so pervasive in the United States that it's often difficult to accept that doesn't really exist other places. The sun is a little low, so I'm struggling to find a place with really great light for today's video, so I apologize if it's not the best looking. I tried to shake things up, and I'm finally outside again for a change. My foot is getting better. I'm hoping to be walking again pretty soon. So there's more problems that come from this. One is that when you give a lot of money to one person all at once, especially in a poor country, there is the possibility that they are going to be unsure what to do with that money, and it can cause animosity. First of all, it can cause problems at their job, and over a long period of time, if this is happening, it definitely encourages employers to do bad things, which is what has happened in the United States. Why pay the people who work in the front if they're going to be handed a lot of money on the side? We know that they're making too much money compared to everyone else, possibly even compared to the people who own the restaurant. So the people who own the restaurant are now in a position to say, well, you're receiving so much money by people giving it to you, we're not going to pay you anymore. And yes, they could go complain and say, well, I have a right to get paid, but the owners can also say, but we have the right to not hire you. You can go complain, but we're going to fire you. And someone is going to work this job without complaining because they're making so much money from the tips. And it ends up in a position where they could be extorted because of the tips. And that is what's happened in the United States, is that a system has been formalized for putting service workers in a precarious position so that they have to live in a very weird way, and they have to pretend like to protect their taxes. They have to lie about a lot of things. It's a terrible situation, and the United States can't easily get out of it, but you don't want to be creating it other places. Other places have good systems that make sense. Don't be, and we said this in another video recently, don't come to a new country and a new culture and bring all of your, this is how things have to work with you. Learn from the place that you're moving to, and keep your head down, see what other people do, and mimic good behavior. Don't be the person who doesn't tip. Don't be the person who's doing less than everyone else, but don't go out of your way to be the one who's doing more than everyone else. And here in Nicaragua, it's a flat rate. It's 10% accepted everywhere, and it's built into most bills. Let the built-in system work the way it does for all the locals. Now, many locals will ask for it to be taken off because they don't have the extra money to afford that. Absolutely don't do that. Now, unless the service is just awful, the whole restaurant is just terrible, just accept the propina, accept the tip that's built in, and go with it. And if it's not built in, pay the 10%, add it on, make sure that you hand it to someone and don't just leave it on the table. Absolutely, right? Do the best thing. But you need to be looking at a couple factors. One is you want to do the right thing for those people, right? You want to treat them with respect. This is not an opportunity to show off that you have more money. It is not an opportunity to browbeat people. It is not an opportunity to be condescending or to look down on them, which is exactly the mentality that often we don't mean to have, but it's what comes, right? And the person who posted was angry that I was telling people to give an appropriate tip and letting them know what an appropriate tip was here in Nicaragua, was like, you need to give 100% because you're coming from a place of privilege and you're coming to this country, but that doesn't make sense because you're cherry picking just people that you're seeing face to face and making sure that they know that you have a lot more money. That is not helping the economy. That's not doing a good job. That is showing off. That is making sure that a person knows that it's you. And we know this from conversations in the US, right? Doing good deeds, when you only do them when people know you're doing good deeds, isn't a good deed. A good deed is one that you're willing to do when no one knows you're doing it, but it makes a positive impact. So if you're just giving tips only to service workers that can look you in the eye or remember who you were and be like, that person, they tipped me so much. They really don't think much of me, but I appreciate the extra money. That is not a healthy way to handle things. It may feel very, very good when you're doing it. I'm giving all this money. I'm going to make this positive difference. Sure. But that is a person who's already being paid and there's already an appropriate tip amount. And if you want to make more of a difference, come back to the restaurant again. Eat more the next time. Act like a good Nicaraguan rather than a weird doing their own thing American trying to play outside of the rules. It's not that it's against the rules. It's not within the rules, right? Play by the rules. Act like a good Nicaraguan. Be a good expat instead of being that weird condescending one who wants to show off that they can give money when they want to and just throw it around. And I get it. But Americans are known worldwide for being condescending and insulting by throwing money around at service workers, looking down on them and using it to kind of get this feeling of superiority. It's a problem, and Americans have created a trend of doing this. So avoid that. And one, it'll give you more money. You're not throwing money away and you'll feel like going to Nicaragua is cheaper. You'll stay longer. Maybe you'll move. A lot of people live here spending many times the cost, like doubling the cost of going to restaurants would simply make us stop going to restaurants. If that was truly a thing, if I really felt compelled to give 100% tip, I would stop going to restaurants completely. It would just price them to not a point that I couldn't afford to go, but to a point that I would never want to go. That's not a good thing, right? That would actually do harm even on this minuscule basis. I was about to edit the video and realized I missed a very important point as the conversation was continuing with the person who had originally posted this, and that is that we often forget the reaction that people have, and this is something that we've seen in a lot of, especially Latin America, where there is a large expat population, and they naturally start bringing tipping culture where they're kind of feeding off of each other, and people who don't know what the rules are, don't know what the customs are, don't know what the culture is, don't know what is respectful, and they'll imagine that what they were doing in the United States will be replicated, and then other Americans are going, well, I do that, and then there's this like competition, which we're used to in the United States, where someone's like, well, I tip 20%, someone's like, I tip 22, and I tip 25, and it tends to be like, well, I don't want to be the person who tips less. And if you don't have a controlled tipping rate like they do here, or when I was a member of a private club in the United States, one of the reasons that I was willing to be a member of the club is they had built-in tipping, 18% there, which was decent at the time, but lower than I normally did. If I tipped at a restaurant, it was normally 20 to 25%. So having a place that was slightly more expensive, but it was on a set 18%, made it more comfortable. It was a much more pleasurable experience. I don't want to eat at a restaurant that has the expectation that I spend more than 10%. If you do that here in Nicaragua, I will avoid your restaurant, right? No one has done that. No one would ever suggest that, and it would be inappropriate. But if someone did, I and many other people would say, why would I go there? One, it's more expensive, and two, it's unpleasant. It's not a good restaurant environment. I don't consider any restaurant in the United States that has tipping, which is all of them, to be on par with Nicaraguan restaurants because they're uncomfortable and they don't provide a pleasant dining experience. I don't want to put up with that. That is just a terrible aspect of the dining. But when it's a built-in 10%, it is not. It is just part of the bill, and you know it going in at the beginning. You know if you need to take it off, you can, and you know that it'll be paid automatically, or you know exactly what to do. There aren't any questions. You don't have to be nervous. You don't have to go through this decision process. That's what good looks like. Trying to break that is harming Nicaragua, and both in a business perspective, because it makes it less attractive as a tourist destination, makes it less nice for the people who live there, and it makes it, for those of us who use the restaurants, an unpleasant experience. If you do that in Nicaragua, that's an encouragement to move on to another country. No one's going to do that. It's not a fear. But that is it's essentially a financial attack on the country. Now, what we see in a lot of cases is that there are areas that do this. You have these enclaves, and it becomes like that, and they have these high tip rates. And what happens quite often, very often, the expected behavior is that the service staff who receives these high tip rates start to not perceive their salary as their income. They start to perceive the tipping as an income. So an important thing shifts. They start only wanting to service foreign customers. They start actually based on, in most cases, on the race or nationality of customers, choosing which ones they want to service and which ones they don't. They will ignore customers, kick them out, treat them badly because they perceive them as having one tipping culture, and they will cater and go crazy over another person because they're perceiving them from another tipping culture. And it's mostly true, but it's to some degree guessing. And because of this, it does harm to the actual businesses because they lose customers. The wait staff has a strong incentive to turn people away. Why bother waiting on a table that's not going to tip you 100% when another table is very likely to tip you 100%. You don't want to serve them. You wouldn't want to take 1 second out of your day to consider them because you have these others who've basically bought your attention. And coming in and throwing money around to buy service away from the Nicaraguans is not, let's just be straight up, it's not okay. We're not talking about it's not advised, it's not a good idea. No, it's not okay. This is a ethical problem. And I know it comes from people who want to do good things. It feels like you're doing the right thing. It certainly seems that way. How could giving someone money to someone be negative? But it is, because you're doing random charity. There's no way to look at it beyond that. It is simply, it's an unexpected, completely undeserved amount of money handed to a random person. It's not being given out to all of society. If you had, exactly 1 penny to give to every person in the country, then great. That's a more or less okay way to do things, right? But if you're giving it to one individual, I'm randomly choosing you. I hate all the other 6.99999 million people in the country, but you I care about, but not because you've done something good, not because there's a special reason, just because you're the person I encountered when I'm handing out money. That's really unhealthy. It's probably unhealthy for them. It's definitely unhealthy for everyone else. But as a restaurateur, if I have customers that are doing that, we're going to ask them to leave. They're going to get banned from the restaurant because they're toxic, right? That's going to create animosity, and it's going to lower the quality of service to the Nicaraguans. We are Nicaraguan restaurants, right? We're not going to accept Americans throwing around money to buy specialty services, right? If you need to be there at a discount, no tip. Take it off the bill. And if you can afford the tip, 10%. That's a number that works. People do not turn away customers because of the 10% difference, and it's not always there. And they know that their real money is guaranteed. The tip is beyond their base salary, which is enough to live on. If there's no customers, they still get paid a living wage. And so the tip is truly a tip. We don't want. If people were routinely tipping like that, I would hope that the government would step in and do something, because this destroys communities. If we did that out on the beach, it would really quickly turn into an Americans-only exclusive club, and the Nicaraguans would be not welcome, even though it would be the Nicaraguans themselves who are keeping the other Nicaraguans out. That's a terrible result, and it makes it clear, I hope, because this is a well-established pattern, that going out and doing a just giving money away activity on any scale is massively negative. It is really harmful to the ecosystems. And what it ends up in an extreme situation is creating a situation where no one wants to work, no one wants to run businesses, and no one wants to visit there, because it's all become toxic. Everyone is out for how much can we maximize money, but only from some people based on the cultures that they're from. It's a bad result. Now, of course, one person doing it just creates a randomness, and it doesn't really help anyone, but it doesn't really hurt anyone. But we certainly don't want to be out there encouraging people to do it. That's dangerous and reckless and harmful. So it's very important, but just pull it back. On a personal level, the only things you need to know are, don't try to be different than the culture. Don't come in as the North American savior there to make a magic difference. Don't do things that are only face-to-face. Don't give out random charity. And people do this a lot, and we'll do some videos about just general charity, because it's good to do charity, but it needs to be done in a very carefully measured way. Charity is a very dangerous activity, and a really great book is Dark Star Safari by Paul Theroux, who used to work in, I believe, the Peace Corps, and he went back and saw the damage that his own work had done in Malawi because it had allowed, and within the region, and I believe in the Southern Sudan, it was not South Sudan back then, and just how much they had funded warlords and disrupted society and made the poor starve to death because they had been giving charity, and they weren't really understanding how it played into the local economy and the local culture, and they ended up basically donating money to the rich, who used it to torture and starve the poor, and use the resources that came through charity channels to withhold even more from those who were very poverty stricken. It empowered the worst. And that's an extreme example, but it's a real one. And he talks about the dangers of North American style charity around the world, where we just throw resources at people without a really clear understanding of why and how it's going to end up affecting people. And so, as I say, like, when you're coming into a new culture, wherever it is, don't be the one who stands out. Don't make a big deal. Don't make a big show of it. Don't try to be the savior. Be a good expat. Be a good citizen. Act like a good Nicaraguan. And that is the best thing that you can do. And if you want to do more, plan really carefully how you're going to healthily, in a good way, impact the environment. I just wanted to break in because this is a really important component that I had forgotten to talk about in the main video, that it is when we start making these recommendations that people go out and do toxic tipping, that it does do real palpable harm to businesses and to in the case of Nicaragua, into the local Nicaraguans who want to still be able to afford and be welcome at Nicaraguan establishments. Another thing that often causes harm is that these kinds of tips are very rare. Someone who maybe makes in tips, let's say, $5 in an evening, suddenly getting $50, we have some problems there. Many Nicaraguans are not well prepared for getting sudden sums of money. This is not necessarily a thing you have to watch out for, and the same thing is true in the United States. If someone wins the lottery, we expect them to be poor and destitute within 2 years. Here in Nicaragua, if you suddenly give someone $50, they have no plans for it, it was not in their budget, they have no reason to expect that. That is like an entire week's salary all at once in cash, right? You have some people who will go out, put it in the bank. Some people will go out and do something really smart with it. Maybe they'll buy something that they need, and that's fantastic. And certainly we want to make sure that everyone's earning more money and can do those things. But what's very tempting is to suddenly have all of that go into beer or some kind of drug. And there's a lot of people who would end up in addiction cycles because of windfalls like that. Now, that is a difficult one because of the rope argument, right? You never want to not give rope to people who can climb out of a hole because somebody might hang themselves. If someone's going to make the decision to hang themselves, that's on them. You should never punish the innocent because a guilty person might do something stupid, or a bad person might do something stupid. So there's a balance there, but simply giving windfalls of money to people is rarely a really good thing. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be contributing. Of course, you want to contribute as much as possible. So how do you take this emotion that you want to do these things? You go, well, but I want to help people. Why would I not tip them? Because that doesn't put money into the system in a healthy way. It doesn't reward the people who are actually making a difference. And it picks and chooses randomly people in certain industries to be highly rewarded when people in other industries are working super hard and being punished, because now there's a even more, if only one person does it, it does very little. But if everyone did this, then you would have waiters making disproportionate amounts of money compared to restaurant owners, to investors, to kitchen workers, to factory workers, and it would change the cost of living. Then waiters would be able to go out to restaurants and eat themselves quite often. They would be able to do more things because they would have more money, and it would cause inflation and cause damage in the economy. It doesn't make sense. There's reasons why you don't want to try to interrupt the system. Of course, that requires lots of people doing it before it becomes a real problem like that, but it's important to look at it at the edge cases to understand where the middle makes sense. So what do? You have this extra money and you want to be able to make a difference. How do you best make a difference with some money here in Nicaragua or anywhere that you're going? Well, one, if you have a reasonable amount of extra money, you have, say, $500 that you would like to put into the system and have that make a positive impact, well, go out to eat more. Go out to drink more. Go out to some events. Go to local events. Make sure you're going to things that put money into the local system. Buy local crafts. Make sure they're being made locally. Make sure they're being sold by the artisans or sold in local stores that work with the artisans. Buy products from the country such as coffee in the example of Nicaragua or whatever. If you want to make positive impacts on Nicaragua specifically, there's lots of easy ways you can do it. Even if you're not in Nicaragua, you can buy Nicaraguan made products like cigars, rum, beer, coffee, different tobacco products. You can get furniture, all kinds of things. And if you're here, you can buy them locally. You can buy them here locally and ship them. You can buy them from remote and have them shipped wherever. You can buy more things for your house. If, when possible, leaning towards more service things is better. We don't want to, become a consumer society where we're buying lots of things and creating a lot of waste. So there's good, balanced ways to do things, but go out to eat more often rather than cooking for yourself at home. There's all kinds of little things you can do to spend that same money that you would throw into a tip, but have it go into the general coffers of the entire economy, where the person who's investing in a restaurant and the person who's working in the kitchen and the person who's sweeping the floors and the waiter and the person who is delivering the food to them and the person who's delivering the beer and the person who is taking out the trash, and all those things, all those people get compensated and all those jobs get protected, and it's even, and it protects against inflation, and it makes everybody a little bit better and helps those restaurants stay afloat and those food suppliers stay afloat, and it helps everybody rather than picking out one person to have a windfall and everyone else to be sad that you like that one person and hated them. Right? So that's one way. Now, if you have a lot of money, it's not talking about $500, we're talking about $20,000, $50,000. Well, there's things you can do there too. You want to make a big positive impact. Of course, you can buy lots of stuff. That's an option. You can start a business. That would be a great way to go. Find a business of doing something that Nicaragua is not doing currently. And I don't mean go start a restaurant. Don't compete with existing businesses. That's fine to do if you want to go down those business paths, but that's not the way to make a really big positive impact. Instead, find something that's missing. Maybe a manufactured food product that is being imported. Oh, there's cereal. Now, $50,000 would be difficult to do for this, but you get the idea. Maybe there is a cereal product that's being imported only from Guatemala. And you say, we don't need to import that from Guatemala. We can start a tiny factory and make this one isolated product right here in Nicaragua. And then you create a handful of jobs with that money, maybe just 3 people, and you don't pay them windfalls worth of money. You don't say, well, I like my employees, so I'm going to pay them $10,000 a month when the going wage for that job is $400 a month. No, you pay them $400. You want to pay them slightly better, $420? Absolutely. Even $440? Yes, but don't skew the numbers and make their position make no sense in the economy. Don't make them a target for someone to be jealous or to attack them. Yes, you want people to say, oh, you got the slightly better factory job. I wish I could get in there someday. Great. Grow that business, hire more people, and do it that way. Don't do it by just randomly picking 1 or 2 people and making them rich without having earned it, because every person you do that to, there's tons of people who are willing to work harder, who didn't get the opportunity, who just didn't happen to sit next to you at the bar at the right time, and they're all being punished for maybe having been a harder worker and being already employed somewhere else, right? You may be rewarding someone simply on a random basis. There's reasons why you wouldn't do this in the American economy. Don't do it in the Nicaraguan economy. Treat it as a normal economic thing, and you will get the best results. This is a general rule. And the same thing, things like the United Nations have shown time and time again that when you give charity to countries, you cause crime, you cause damage. It is rare. Yes, absolute minimum foods do need to be supplied. There are times that some amount of charity is required, but pure straight up charity, oh, this is a culture that just needs to be gifted everything, makes people feel worthless, and it increases the level of crime and often creates criminal and political instability activities. Those are really negatives, things that really cause a lot of harm to the poor, and the rich just get richer. So you don't want to do that. You want to create healthy, positive financial transactions, economic transactions that are just generally good. And that's pretty easy to do. So you find this here, you create 3 jobs of people making cereal, and then you're using Nicaraguan services to ship that food around the country, to put it on store shelves, and then you grow because you're making a good product. Make more products. Look for more things that are made outside the country. Make more of them inside the country. Create jobs here. If you're going to take jobs away, take them away from the outside. So go to the shelves, go to the stores, see what things, and it could be food items, but it could be manufactured items, right? You go to the store and there's not a single doorknob being manufactured in Nicaragua. Well, here's an opportunity opportunity. Start making those doorknobs in Nicaragua instead of making them somewhere else. And for all these reasons is the same reason why we're not rushing to open a store to sell our swag here on the channel. We'd love to have our hats like this out and available for sale, but why are we not doing that? Because we want to have them as much as possible made here in Nicaragua, which these are, but getting it into a process where we're able to get them for shipping in the United States and such is something that we're working on. And Marcela is the one who's been working on this, and she is currently getting her chemo treatments. So we're going to be behind on that more than we wanted to be, but that is something that will come. But when it comes, I am working very diligently to make sure that the work for all that, the supplies as much as possible, are all coming from Nicaragua, so that not only are you supporting the channel when you buy something like that, theoretically in the future, and I was asked about that sometime recently, but also that it is an actual, really healthy, good way of giving back to Nicaragua. That money has to go somewhere. Why have it go to some manufacturer off in some country you don't know about? Why not have it go and tangibly improve life in a very small way for a lot of different people across many different parts of Nicaragua? The person who makes the hat, the person who embroiders the hat, the person who packages the hat, the person that responds and ships the hat, all those things, the person who designs all the things, everything in Nicaragua as much as possible. Now, we're not going to create a whole bunch of jobs because we're selling some swag here on the channel, but we may create a half-time job of dealing with that if we really get this going. And I have someone who wants to promote this as a brand here in the country. Doing all those things, we could get potentially a full-time person who just orders, designs, and ships the clothing items and other items. And that would be amazing and fantastic. And what a difference that would make, because that one person is an actual job created by the channel. But the other positions, all the people who are actually embroidering the hats or whatever, no, it's not their full-time, but we may be bolstering a poor family's side business or their family business, right? Maybe they have just, one person who works there and the kids help out, and it's what puts their food on the table. And by making our hats or our t-shirts, we may be, adding 20-25% to the volume of work that they do, and we don't pay discounted rates, right? So we may be significantly helping improve their bottom line, which allows them to, get medicine that they need to take care of their dog and bring them to the vet, to get that extra chair for their table, to maybe be able to get a television or extra, send their kids to a private school or whatever. That could be the thing that makes the difference. And then that flows through the economy and everybody wins, and we avoid creating hotspot problems. That's the healthy, natural way to help an economy, and it makes a big difference. You want everybody to benefit as much as you can equally. And the biggest challenge here in Nicaragua, we say this a lot, is not the low pay. That is not the problem. That does suck, but it is not the problem. The big problem is unemployment. So anything you can do to create a job, that makes things so much better. That is where you make the biggest impact most quickly. Thank you for joining me. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Scott Alan Miller. The link is above and down in the show notes. If you want to send in questions, you can send in a video question. All the instructions are in the show notes. Or if you just want to talk on the conversation down below, you can ask questions, leave your comments, whatever, and send them in. Really appreciate everybody's feedback. That's what allows the conversations to happen. As always, be a good expat, make a positive difference. Don't use your opportunity to show off. Instead, secretly make a big difference and be a friend of Nicaragua. We really appreciate all of you. We have an amazing community here. I will see all of you tomorrow.